All right, so it looks like we have some great attendance and nice to see so many new faces also on our Zoom call. So thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Eric Montel, one of the co-directors for the MCRC, and we have an exciting presentation for you today from some of our members and our sponsors that we're really looking forward to sharing with you in our first Insights Exchange of 2021. So with that, I say welcome to all of you. Hope you're doing well under these challenging times. And I'd like to turn it over to our fabulous co-director, Sophie Egan.
Thank you so much, Eric. And I echo the excitement at seeing so many of you in total and so many new faces especially. It's great to have you joining us. This is going to be a truly invaluable session. It's a fitting topic for us as climate action is nothing new to the MCRC. However, we are really excited to make it a particular focal point for our work for 2021 and beyond. There are so many reasons for this. The scale and urgency of the climate emergency demands it, for one, but also that as an organization at the forefront of such powerful climate solutions as advancing plant-forward diets and reducing food waste in particular, we are so uniquely well positioned to make a significant contribution, both through our thought leadership to the broader campus dining sector and hopefully the overall food service industry, and through our actual reduction in collective greenhouse gas emissions. So, thinking about what we're all about, menus of change principles, the intersection of human and environmental health, this is just a slightly different way of saying what is already core to our mission and to our purpose, but also thinking about it in terms of measurable climate action. And this is where, menus of change principles are directional. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today has to do with metrics and target setting and how it is that you move toward some measurable change over time. One of the most immediate examples of that in the collaborative is our collective impact initiative. Next slide, please. So for those of you who aren't familiar, we as an organization, and sorry, I skipped over the agenda slide, which is, this is this fantastic agenda that we have in store. You'll be hearing from 3 leading members within their university programs focused on sustainability. So it's Alex Bryan from University of Michigan, Matt Tevitt, one of our newest members from University of Reading in the United Kingdom, and Carol Bartolotto with University of California, Los Angeles. And then in a way I think about Food for Climate League, our newest research collaborator, is kind of when you think about these different sustainability programs, how do you nail the messaging? How do you then communicate it all through language and so forth? And so she's going to be talking about some ideas there and a framework that Food for Climate League has that can really benefit Menus of Change University Research Collaborative members, and then how we might join forces to pursue some future research. And we'll have some closing remarks from Ghislaine as well. So back to collective impact, the opportunity most immediately at our fingertips. There is a slide that might appear at some time that shows you how basically the point is that our 2020 data collection period is just around the corner. So a really, really warm welcome back to Action. Jackie Bertoldo, just back from maternity leave. Many of you are familiar with her. If you're not, she is the person responsible for really leading this incredibly important initiative. And what the strategic initiative is a collective target, a collective goal to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2030 through our protein portfolio. So leveraging the outsized impact and outsized opportunity that protein purchases in particular have. So details are coming, whether you've already been submitting for a long time and we're just going to get your next batch of data, or if you're brand new to submitting data and need some guidance on how to get started. So that is just an example of what we're doing collaborative-wide in terms of our united efforts to drive climate action. And now to kick things off with some campus-specific examples, I'm really excited to turn it over to Alex Bryan, University of Michigan. He's been a key contributor to our Nutrition and Sustainability Committee. And Alex, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great, thanks Sophie, and thanks all for having me. I will be talking quick. We've got short time here to get a lot of information over to you, so bear with me. I'm going to dive into a really specific example of some of our carbon neutrality work that's focused on what we call Sustainable Mondays. Next slide, please. Quick overview, University of Michigan, we've got 9 dining halls, 23 retail cafe locations, about 25 to 30,000 meals a day, normal years. We work with about 100 different student projects annually that range from kind of formal and informal class projects to student groups or individual students that might be like, hey, I've got a biodigester, I want to hook up to your building to kind of get this data set to do some analysis on swipes for a stats class, right? We spend about $100,000 annually with our campus farm and have been with them since the beginning to help scale their operation. And we also operate the student-started food pantry on campus. We're running that 7 days a week, and that's operated through our dining program, which is a little bit unique for some schools as well. Next slide, please. But I'm going to talk about carbon neutrality and also make my my chef there, Frank, famous. He's on the call too. So Frank, surprise, there you are. He's out at the campus farm doing some harvesting of kale and Swiss chard and other things with the students. So next slide. So like I said, we're going to dive into Sustainable Mondays. Sustainable Mondays was a project that started 2017 to sort of somewhat uneven rollout. Our then residential dining director wanted to shake things up and sort of just said, we're doing Sustainable Mondays. You've got a week to figure it out. Don't serve meat if you can or something. I don't know, have fun, you know? So one of those moments where you're like, okay, this could be helpful. This is also a pain in the neck, but we'll roll with it. And what, you know, sort of came out of that is that we would implement across all the dining halls, asking them to reduce their red meat serving and try to increase, you know, legumes, plant-based, other things. And really what we were trying to do is promote heavily the sustainability things we were doing on a normal basis on Mondays, just blow out our marketing and really not tell the students that we're going to stop serving them red meat, right? So it's kind of a reverse switch there. Next slide. So while this was going on, the University of Michigan has been under about a 2 year or so ramp up to goals around carbon neutrality, right? And so during this time, we've had students protest, be arrested, you know, pass things that are around divestment. And the president also announced this pathway to carbon neutrality created through a commission that would pull together recommendations for how we would get to carbon neutral. And those recommendations, draft recommendations from the committee just came out this last month with some really aggressive targets. Next slide. So back to our research here. We're looking at the 2018-2019 academic year, comparing Mondays and Wednesdays during that period. So 32 Mondays to 32 Wednesdays. We chose those days as being very like days, right? So on our class schedule, students have Mondays and Wednesdays are mostly the same. Our swipe count over that whole period of time was almost identical. It was 118,000 on Monday and 116,000 swipes on Wednesday, right? So really, really similar sort of flow of students and numbers of students overall. And what we wanted to do was just compare what's our greenhouse gas impact. Next slide. To do that, we really needed to build up our database and our kind of massive infrastructure and information push. We went through and had these students over the summer tag all of our purchased items with an emissions product or emissions category, and then a GHG value, greenhouse gas emissions value, that came from research by Heller and Kuehlen, which happened to be at U of M. So that every item we ordered based on their primary ingredient would have a greenhouse gas emissions value based on weight. Once that's in our database, we can then roll that up through all the way out to our point of service at the menu item to say, hey, this plate of lasagna has this amount of greenhouse gas emissions associated because it has 0.05 grams of oregano or whatever that thing might be in our database. And then we ran our production menu for both Mondays and Wednesdays during that time period to understand what we would have had to order or purchase to create the menus on those various days. Next slide. That left us, when we ran through the data, we saw about a 14% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, or 264 metric tons of CO2, which is honestly a little bit less than what we expected. Next slide. And that was because of this sort of uneven rollout, as I mentioned, right? Which allows us to do a few things. One, we get to understand, which dining halls really lived into the mission and what effect that had compared to those that maybe perhaps didn't, right? East Quad basically didn't serve meat, saw a 45% reduction. And Bursley, I think they just said, we didn't get that memo. We're going to serve some more beef on Mondays. Next slide. And a little deeper dive yet still shows, like I said, East Quad stopped serving beef, more or less stopped serving chicken, pork, all the ruminant animals. A little bit of an increase in, I think, fish and seafood and dairy solids, but overall 45% reduction in their emissions because of that. Next slide. Mojo Jordan here, more or less in line with what we had expected this kind of no red meat policy would look like. No beef, increase in chicken and eggs, a little increase in fish and seafood, a little reduction in pork, no other ruminants, and about a 36% decrease. Next slide. And then South Quad is another example here. I think mostly this year they served some of our blended burgers, tried to live in and share that, which helped us have a little bit of a beef reduction, a little bit more, some other items there. So a little bit of living into the sort of mission, but not quite. So smaller reduction. Next slide. So based on all of that, we're able to come up with like, what's our hypothetical? If really people live into it, pretty similar to what Mojo Jordan was doing, we estimate around 36% reduction right off the top of our food greenhouse gas emissions, just not serving red meat on Mondays, right? Which is pretty great. Anything you can knock 36% away with a relatively small change like that, that probably cost us less, we're doing good. Next slide. As I mentioned, this President's Commission on Carbon Neutrality, because of this work we'd established, all of this sort of baseline data and work along the way, we were able to be brought in to be a part of this Commission on Carbon Neutrality and really inform the food recommendations within those goals, which led us to where we'll have Scope 3 neutrality, or where food is included by 2040. And then working on a manuscript with those researchers that should be out later this year that take a little deeper dive into some protein substitutions, as well as cost analysis to understand, like, okay, if you're switching beef out, what are you putting in place of it? What's the cost of that? Again, the inside scoop is it costs less money. And then we've also been working with City of Ann Arbor to work on their climate action plan. So we've been consultants with them to look at food and food waste. And as part of that, their goals heavily include a plant-forward diet for both things they're procuring and then sort of citizens at large. And we'll be doing some education campaigns, hopefully, over the next few years in partnership with them. Next slide. And then what does it all mean? Like, what's next for us? We understand that carbon neutrality is the way forward. We have to be doing this work for many, many reasons we could go into. And what is also doing for us is opening up door after door for research partnerships with faculty, with other staff, with our students. And we've commissioned kind of working on other papers in all of these sort of areas, right? So we're trying to explore what does it look like to really reduce our carbon and pull things out, whether that's all electric cookware. We're trying to expand and implement Sustainable Mondays on other days of the week. That one's a culture shift for sure. Explore the research climate positive foods, regenerative beef, and then looking at building out, the how do we tell the story? How do we get the students involved? Because the big push to move from Mondays to other days is going to take them to come along. And that's it.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Alex. I love hearing the collaboration occurring between you and your colleagues in operations, with the faculty and researchers, and also, of course, the role that your university plays in your surrounding community, and thinking about regional climate action kind of coalitions and consortia. I think especially too, looking with everything that's come out of the pandemic, the greater synergies with surrounding communities, surrounding supply chains is ever more apparent, and the role that you're playing there in our Ann Arbor is really inspiring. So thank you, really appreciate that. Keep your questions ready for Alex. We'll have panel Q&A after Carol's presentation. Up next, we have Matt Tebbett joining us late his time in at University of Reading. Delighted to welcome you. Matt has actually never even attended an Insights Exchange. We threw him right into the fire, and he's on the speaker lineup. So he represents University of Reading, which is our first member institution, full member institution outside of the United States. Very excited to have you. And Matt, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Sorry, could I just share my screen? So, thanks.
And while we're waiting for Matt, I meant to mention too that all of our presentations will be shared after the Insights Exchange today. We shared the recording and the PowerPoint decks. So keep an eye out for that in case you're eager as I am to get a closer look at a lot of these slides, because these are packed with information and great strategies. So Matt, take it away.
Hi, good evening. So I thought I'd just introduce Reading firstly as a new member. So the Climate Stripes is perhaps our most high profile piece of work that came out of the University of Reading. As you can see, as everyone knows, the blue are the cooler years. Across to the right gets a lot hotter. So I think that sort of caught the world's imagination in terms of why we have a climate emergency. So for us as a university, climate is fundamentally key to our existence. Just to give you a bit of background about Reading, we're sort of west of London. We were born out of the University of Oxford, so we were part of the Oxford system and then became our own university in 1926. We've got King Henry I is buried under a car park somewhere in Reading, yet to be found. And it's a big tech area. We have an abbey. Kate Middleton was born here. We were in the news for bad reasons in the summer because of a terrorist attack, and Aladdin was filmed here recently. Anyway, on to food. So Reading, we teach food, agriculture, soil science is one of our big ones. So in the top left, you can see our Cocoa Quarantine Centre, which acts as a DNA centre for genetic material. On the right, we've got the National Fruit Collection, which is the world's largest genetic bank of living fruit trees, so apples, pears, all there for the future in case the world needs them. And then at the bottom you can see a bit about our beef. So our beef, we're self-sufficient for beef, and a large number of our beef cattle are now involved in grassland restoration, which is very much about capturing carbon, restoring meadows, sort of habitat-rich grassland. It's all very exciting. A bit about us as a sort of dining department. So we take around £5 million a year across 6 outlets. You'll notice that martini glass, obviously in the UK, the drinking age is 18. So alcohol is an integrated part of what we do. A meal costs about £3.25 and a beer is £2.20, just to give you an idea of where we're coming from. So let me go on to the... Okay, the first thing I wanted to sort of share was in the UK, we have a system called the People and Planet League, which is fairly brutal. It's independently scored, and it ranks every single institution in the UK from in degree classes. So in the UK, that'd be like first class degrees, 2-1, 2-2. So Reading currently sits in the top tier. I think we're at 28. I will show you quickly let me just escape from here. It's this website. So we are all scored from top to bottom. So we can find Reading here. Open up Reading. This is publicly viewable for everyone. And then you can start to see how we're doing on every single area. So we can go into food, for example. Come down, sorry. we'll go down to workers' rights, and then you can just sort of work your way through. But this has become a massive recruitment tool, both for universities that are engaged and aren't engaged. So I was saying to Sophie earlier this week that we expect dining league tables to come over to the UK, and I think this is something that's probably going to go in the other direction. For food, it's very much about, for example, you get the top scores if you go organic. Reading as a university is aiming to be net zero by 2030, and we've achieved 45% reduction in our emissions at this point in time. So I'd say that it is, for again, going back to those climate stripes, it's incredibly important for us to actually be doing operationally what we're saying we're doing academically. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about is our sustainability framework. So in terms of how we implemented this, we learned that a lot of small changes often make the bigger changes. And that's where the university's been doing well. It's not about making all the glitzy changes. It's, for example, us taking our own beef. It becomes a much more precious commodity. We use less of it. In terms of our sustainability, we're becoming more transparent about what we're doing. We're more honest about what we have done, what we are doing, what we want to work on. And again, it all goes back to those small differences. So Alex spoke earlier about changing from, for us, from gas to electric. That's a very similar theme for us. Let me just share out my screen again. So this is our sustainability policy. At the moment, for example, we have a number of kitchens that are completely electric, using entirely renewable power generated on site or off site. We don't buy any power from other areas. So again, this is our live document that any of our students can read, anyone externally. It is very clear on what we are doing. Menus of change principles have been wrapped in at the top from an early stage. We also define what we are, what we deem as sustainability and what's included. For us, this has been a really, really positive step forward, because it's not as static as a sort of concrete policy. It allows us to adapt and change and pick up things that we're not, things that we want to do. So for example, we've just been awarded funding by the UK government to switch out all our natural gas cooking equipment to electric as part of a drive for the UK to become, to keep reducing its carbon emissions. Anyway, so let's go back. Carbon footprinting is the next thing that I'd like to just quickly talk to you about. So we've been doing a lot of work with students about how do we get them to, along the same lines of as Alex, how do we get students to change their behaviour? So a lot of this has been, we can calculate the values. We have TUCO, who is a national body for university caterers, have a really good calculator, which you can see the link there. So we've actually, in the last week or so, devised coloured clouds. So we have a green cloud for positive, as in this is a dish with low carbon emissions, or a red cloud for really bad, and that could be a flight to New York, for example. And then using how far can you drive a car? Like what is the effect? Because otherwise people are like, what does this gases information mean? It means nothing to me, and pass over it. And then we don't get the behavioural change. Lastly, we have committed, along with, say, people like Unilever and Brewdog, to become carbon positive or negative, whichever way around you want it. I think carbon positive sounds better, positive. So this is about not just being carbon neutral, this is about capturing carbon in your day-to-day operations. So because our university's decided to be neutral by 2030, we decided we should try and go further. So we are working with our supply chain, so Unilever Brakes, which is an interesting one, owned by Cisco. But in the UK, they've committed to a 30% reduction in their logistics and operations, but say in the US, they don't seem to have done that yet. And then the supply chain, looking at our supply chain, we've got 2 carbon positive brewers now, so supplying beer into us. And I think that brings me to the end. So hopefully I've stuck to my 9 minutes.
I think many people's minds are blown at the moment, included, and I already knew some of that. This is a little bit of a lightning round, as many of you can gather. And what you've shared, Matt, is so rich. I think really what I plan to do, what I encourage anyone in a similar position, is spend more time with these great resources you've pointed us to. There's so much to dig into in terms of these tools, playing around with on your own campuses. So really appreciate just you kind of orienting us to the available resources that have really made the difference for you. And I especially encourage folks to take a look at the hospitalityuor.co.uk, that one that I added in the chat. This is their entire kind of food policy for Reading. And what's pretty amazing about that is how it connects it menus of change principle by principle to everything that they're doing. And so for all of you that have been working on these already for many, many years, I think you'll see the level of thought and rigor there for their sustainable food policy and framework is quite impressive. So thank you so much, Matt. Last but not least, over to Carol, and back to Ghislaine with Carol's slides to this time talk about something mentioned just now around labeling. And of course, that is a very big topic and plays a big role in this overall puzzle. Carol?
Hi, yes, thank you. Thank you so much. So I am going to talk about using a low and high carbon footprint icon to inform students and drive choice. And so basically, at UCLA Dining, we had a collaboration with a PhD student, Hannah Mallon, for this project. It was called the Impossible Foodprint Project. And so basically what we did was we seasoned Impossible meat. We added it to a line at Rendezvous West, which is sort of like Chipotle. And then we added different tools to inform students about the addition of Impossible meat and also the link between diet and climate change. So we use things like posters and table tents and LCD screens, and we added a website, and we had a low carbon footprint icon, which we hadn't been using, so we implemented it. And what we found with this project was an increase in low carbon footprint food choices by 50%, a 8% decrease in the mean carbon footprint of each entree that was served. And then when considering all the entrees for fall of 2019, when this project occurred, we found a decrease in 16.4 metric tons of CO2, which was the equivalent of driving about 42,000 miles. We also noted that students were more willing to change behavior and eat more plant-based options if the messages were related to climate change. And overall, what we learned from this project was that if you have a variety of tools and a tasty option, you can really drive change in terms of student choice. So what we decided to do was to expand the icons. So as I mentioned, we already have the low carbon icon. So we added the high carbon icon. And what was interesting at the time when we implemented this, it was January of 2020, Australia was on fire. So having the earth and the red earth, it really, the students really took notice. Once we implemented it, it came up in leadership meetings, use less red meat, and students really paid more attention to that high carbon icon. But one of the issues was that we had to create a criteria. How do we apply this icon for use at all of our dining halls? In our back-end system with recipes, we have over 7,600 recipes. And if we added, the full complex information about land use and water use. It just was too much, and it really wasn't sustainable, and we wouldn't really be able to do it. So we created a criteria based on greenhouse gas emissions. And this was actually created by Hannah Mallon, the graduate student, and Dr. Jenny Jay on campus at UCLA. And they basically used the planetary health diet and calculated a daily footprint of 1,780 grams of greenhouse gas emissions. And so how we divided it was low carbon would be less than 25% of that daily value. And then the yellow or the medium would be 26 to 50, and then high carbon would be greater than 50. And this just kind of shows you it in graphical form. So what we did was, how we applied the criteria was for the low carbon footprint icon, everything that was vegan, everything that was vegetarian, and less than 1.5 ounces of cheese. In terms of eggs, if it had less than or equal to 2 eggs, or less than or equal to 4 ounces of liquid eggs, equal to or less than 6 ounces of yogurt, equal to or less than 8 ounces of mollusks, and then sustainable fish equal or less than 4 ounces of any of our certified sustainable fish. So all those items received the low carbon foot icon. And then the high carbon, we simplified it to if it had beef, bison, lamb, or any dish with greater than 3.5 ounces of cheese. Those items received the high carbon foot icon. We decided to really keep it simple. We didn't add a yellow one because having more information doesn't necessarily change behavior. We wanted to drive students towards choosing more low carbon and less high carbon, or fewer high carbon. So then after we then applied this criteria to all of our residential dining halls, we then promoted it. So we use table tents, we use LCD screens. So this gives you an example of some of the promotions. We did a table tent and an LCD screen where we talked about choose more of these, choose less of these, talked about what is a carbon footprint. And then we added new items like spiced red lentils. And we talked about these are super low carbon footprint, added the icon. We gave them a graphical image so they could actually see lentils compared to beef. We use this carbon footprint scorecard in many of our different interventions that we use for students, whether it was in posters on the website. We found in the research that we collaborated with Hannah that this tool was very effective. It really just, you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and you look at this and you get a really great message. Beef, high carbon, lentils, vegetables, beans, etc., low carbon. Another picture is worth 1,000 words. 1 beef burrito is equal to 10 veggie burritos. So we tried to give students not as many words, but really hit home with graphical images where they could look at it for 1 second and get the message. Wow, I could really make a change. The other issue that we realized was that students had a lot of misconceptions about plant versus animal protein. So we created graphical images comparing them to bust some of those myths that students have, or some of the concerns about choosing more plant-based proteins. So, you know, they're higher in fiber, they're higher in healthy substances such as phytochemicals, versus beef being higher in saturated fat. And then of course, you know, the carbon footprint issue. And there's another myth about, you know, plant proteins are incomplete, you know, animal proteins are better, you know, busting a lot of those myths about that and putting it into context. Here's your daily target. Beef, just 1 4-ounce serving, or beef or lamb, will put you over your daily target. But look at where beans and lentils fall. Look at where vegetables fall. So all of this, you know, the goal was to empower students. And then you can see here, and give students information. And this is what our menu looks like. So you can see, here's the icons added to the low carbon options and then the higher carbon option. And you see at the top of every single page on our dining website, fight climate change with food, choose more low carbon and fewer high carbon options. Learn more here. And you can see the website that we created with lots of information, which talks about the carbon footprint scorecard and lots of other issues. Our goal was really, we want to empower students. We want them to understand that they, through their food choices, can make a difference. Currently, we're working on a survey for the low and high carbon footprint icon to gather more information. We're also working with MCRC to create a toolkit to share a lot of these resources and a lot of what we found with our original research with Hannah Mallon. And to reiterate, we learned through Hannah's research in collaboration with UCLA Dining that if you use a variety of tools, they can all work together to drive choice and decrease the carbon footprint. And icons, using these high and low carbon footprint icons at UCLA is just part of our overall strategy to increase awareness about food and climate change and decrease greenhouse gas emissions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol. There is a flurry of responses coming in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and tee up some of those for you. Just a note to everyone, if you have a question that you'd like to ask verbally, if you can just raise your hand, just note that in the chat that you'd like to ask a question. Otherwise, just keep them coming through the written questions and comments in the chat. We've got about 10 minutes or a little under 10 minutes. So Carol, the most burning question is, well, first, your marketing materials are amazing. And I see a lot of heads nodding as well. But what has the student response been? That is
you know, we have a student leadership meeting, and it was interesting, the very first one, when they saw the icon. And then I would look in the dining hall, and we had table tents with just a sea of the high and low carbon footprint icons. So the students were very interested. And the very first student leadership PRB meeting was, you know, serve less red meat. And they were upset. Or I received, you know, information or questions from students. Why are we serving so much meat? So in the original research, we didn't have the high carbon, and that's why we're now following up with a survey to ask students questions about that. So what I'm relaying to you is basically what happened afterwards. But there was a lot more, it was very fascinating to me, a lot more interest and engagement when we added the high carbon footprint icon. And remember, you know, what I was saying with Australia being on fire, I think students were upset. And then of course, the impact of all the, this climate strikes, et cetera, it was sort of a perfect storm for a lot of awareness and student engagement.
Mm-hmm, right, and it's nice how you framed it as really a source of empowerment. So often when you see, you know, the Amazon burning or any number of images that are very disturbing, overwhelming. Eve's going to speak about the mental health issues related to this in a moment. It can feel paralyzing, like what can I do? And so I really like how your framing is very centered around that message of empowerment, and that food, in particular, your food choices can be a huge tool there. Another question we had from Bridget for you again, Carol, is have you tried other meat analogs besides Impossible? And if so, is there a notable favorite?
You know, we have tried some others like that chicken and other options. We even have tried Beyond Meat. The decision to try to use Impossible was made by our assistant vice chancellor and the director of UCLA Dining. But yes, we've definitely tried others. I think it sort of helps, you know, when you have that name like Impossible Meat, but I don't think that that was the only thing that drove or made all the changes. I think it was a combination of all the different interventions. But yes, we do use other.
Got it.
Analysts.
So, and my mistake, we actually have just 4 minutes left or 3 minutes left for Q&A. 2 more questions for you, Carol, and then if anyone does have questions for Matt, I noted that Alex, thank you. You answered all of your questions very diligently in the chat already, so thank you for that, going above and beyond, but great questions to Alex earlier. So a question for you, Carol, is about terminology. Ghislaine noted, you know, words matter. What about not using protein, but meat and legumes instead of the, you know, macronutrient, essentially, right?
Oh, using words like meat. Well, you know what I noticed?
Really emphasize the protein, you know, piece of it there. I don't know if you want to elaborate on your question, Ghislaine, but being more specific, more ingredient driven, right?
I'd love that. It's just that I feel that we categorize macronutrients in good, protein, or bad, fat and sugar. And so just using the name of the food instead of the nutrition designation or the nutritional aspect of it would help people sort out, you know, the information about food. And if we were able to link protein to legumes, rather than plant protein, which like people put vegetables in it and many other things that are plant-based but not really rich in protein, that might be helpful as well.
Interesting. You know, just one comment about that. The students are, you know, they're really into the keto diet right now. And, you know, they talk about protein, protein, protein. I need high quality protein. And another student at UCLA did some research looking at that's one of the inhibitors for students trying, you know, things like legumes, etc. So I think part of the phrasing and talking about it, protein, is that's the language that I'm hearing from students. And that's the, you know, how I'm trying to relate to them in very plain language that, look, you know, their study was published in 1994 in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, that they're equivalent. And still people are talking about that plant protein is not equivalent to animal protein. Complete fallacy. It's even in nutrition textbooks that are used in universities, like where I used to teach basic nutrition. And so, you know, trying to get that message out there is so important. And it's just using the language that I'm hearing.
Yeah, you're
understand
meeting students where they are, right? I mean, that
right.
makes sense. And it also points to a study we have in the works that Ghislaine is spearheading. And actually, if any of you were at the October meeting, you saw a lot of reactions to the Data Central presentation by Colleen McClellan about this very topic. And so we are actually excited to dig into some of these plant protein perceptions, misperceptions, myths, and opportunities there, not necessarily just for education or literacy, but really storytelling, right? And the opportunities to educate through stories, which will really connect with students' hearts and not just their heads, but fundamentally will get at some of those core barriers that you mentioned. So that's actually a perfect segue to our next speaker, which is Eve Turow-Paul with Food for Climate League. As I mentioned, Food for Climate League is our newest research collaborator. Some of you have had the chance to meet Eve in some smaller groups, advisory council, research working group, and so forth, but really excited for her to speak to what opportunities she sees leveraging the MCRC network, and also just to share with you Food for Climate League's theory of change and how it is that they're looking at this language and storytelling opportunity as well as challenge. Please do keep the questions coming to any of our speakers through the chat, and Carol can hopefully address some of the questions we didn't get to yet. So Eve, over to you.
Thanks, Sophie. I appreciate it. I have already learned so much today. This is great, and I'm excited to share with you all the work that we are doing at Food for Climate League, because I'm hoping we can all collaborate. Hold on one second while I get this into presentation mode. So a few of you probably have already heard me speak, so I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, and happy to answer any questions that anyone has. But Food for Climate League, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We were founded midway through 2019. We're still a baby organization, getting our feet, but moving at a rapid pace as a startup. And our our whole goal really is to create new ways of talking about food and climate. So Carol, what you were just saying resonated with me deeply. Creating new narratives around food and climate that will democratize sustainable eating and really speak to a wider population than current narratives around food and climate do. We want to allow people to tackle the climate crisis bite by bite, but in order to get there, we really think that the way we talk about food and climate has to be reframed to make it something that's easy, that's alluring, and we need to, as you mentioned, meet people where they are. If they care about the keto diet, how do we talk about this in a way that meets them where they are, instead of trying to get them to care about perhaps the carbon footprint, which might not be front of mind for them. Ultimately, our goal is to create tested narratives that celebrate delicious, healthy, and Instagram-worthy foods that are great for us and great for the planet. This is our ecosystem. So we're a new organization, but the reason why we've been able to accomplish what we have so far is because we have amazing, amazing partners supporting us both with funding and with research capacities and with implementation. So in 2020, we worked with a fabulous group of sponsors. Google was our seed funder and then also sponsored another research project last year. We also undertook a project with Norbrands at Unilever. And then we have also helped found the Sodexo Future Food Collective, which is a consortium essentially of companies that are coming together to do a number of different research projects around increasing acceptance of dishes with a greater biodiversity of ingredients, right? They have a question here, which is how do you get people to pick up products or pick up a dish that has perhaps an ingredient in it that they're not familiar with, whether it is lentils or spelt or amaranth or jackfruit. We also were lucky to receive a grant from Eat the Change last year, which we are using to run actually an implementation workshop with WBCSD and Climate Collaborative. And then we also have amazing, amazing research partners. Future Food Institute has been our partner from day one, helping us with our human-centered insights. We have you all here, MCURC, and then Data Central, who I know you all work with as well, who have been fantastic partners for us in testing different concepts on menu. So why did we create a new nonprofit? Because we think that we are going at this from an entirely different angle, which is the social emotional angle, as Sophie was alluding to. We really don't just focus on psychographics, on demographics, but on psychographics. And we started off our work by doing a landscape analysis of the current narratives around food and climate that are being used, whether it's by NGOs or large corporations. But the other thing that we did that I think has been critical to our work is we talked to a number of professors in climate psychology and climate communications to really assess why is talking about anything related to sustainability so different than talking about anything else. And we were able to really learn about the emotional triggers, the difficult emotions that are brought up when someone sees something like a carbon label. And it's really interesting too, as I was seeing these different presentations, to think about what the different emotional triggers might be based on age now and exposure of these different generations. But our work is really focusing in on our core human needs. Our question that we're asking ourselves is, how do these sustainable ways of eating meet people where they are emotionally? And most of the time, food and climate communications are asking people to give something up in order to do something for the greater good. It's speaking to people's sense of purpose. But if you're really thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, purpose is at the very top, and control and safety and belonging and self-esteem are in the middle. And especially during the crisis that we're all in, there aren't that many people who are really leaning into the top of Maslow's pyramid. So what we're doing as an organization is thinking about how can we create new ways of talking about sustainable eating that are going to speak to, that are going to resonate with people's desire for control and safety, people's desire for community and belonging. Sometimes that means that we don't bring up the climate at all. Our original set of research that was completed in 2019 and the beginning of 2020 was written up in our first report, How to Talk About Food and Climate, communications best practices to support a climate smart food movement. This report is my baby, 65 pages chock full of information. That's really going through the landscape analysis that we completed, pulling out the key points of the expert interviews that we did, but then also placing it in the context of this crazy world that we're living in. What does this mean in the context of COVID? What does it mean in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement? How do we use food as a vehicle for social justice? How do we use it as a vehicle for personal empowerment when it comes to our personal health? One of the key takeaways from that research sprint was around really identifying what makes it so hard to link food and climate. You know, why do we need a group like this? Why do we all need to be running all of these different experiments trying to figure it out? Well, there's a lot of barriers. I just put up 6 of them. There are more. Number one, we're talking about complex agriculture concepts, right? What's sustainable in one scenario is not sustainable in another. The psychological triggers to content around climate was a really big one for us that kept coming up over and over again. This feeling of ambivalence, of anxiety, of guilt, working directly with Dr. Renee Lertzman, who wrote a whole book on this topic called Environmental Melancholia, really interesting. We're also asking people to change their personal food habits. Further, and I'm sure that this is all stuff that's also come up in research from MCURC, but there aren't any clear metrics of success often, right? That's one of the reasons why food waste has resonated more, or giving up meat on Mondays, right? It's like something that's very black and white, very clear cut. But the flexitarian diet is a bit less clear cut, eating more plant-based, a bit less clear cut. And then the final 2 have also had a major impact on our approach as an organization. So one of the other observations that we had, again, asking people to give something up for the greater good, is that a lot of the communications we saw were framed in the negative: wasteless, meatless, it's zero waste or zero. It's all about extracting something. It's not about the amazing, delicious things that are available for us to eat. And then the last part of this is really looking at how elitist and exclusionary a lot of this language is. On the most basic, right, side of things, biodiversity, that's really confusing. Regenerative, if you just look at Google Trends, people searching, like, what do these terms mean? It is on the rise. And also a lot of food and climate communications from corporations are really targeted towards a mainly white, mainly wealthy audience. And those aren't the only people who are concerned about the climate or open to eating in a way that would benefit the climate. We also have several mistaken assumptions that were identified. One is that everyone will take action around the climate if they're just educated about it, that sustainable goods can only resonate with a small portion of the population. And the third, most importantly, is that you have to talk about the climate to create climate beneficial change. We don't think that's true. We think oftentimes that's actually going to create more of a problem. I shouldn't say more of a problem. It is going to narrow your window of your audience, who you're going to be speaking to. So coming out of all of that, we developed our 10 best practices for food and climate communications. 5 of these are for when you're talking about food and sustainability issues when you're not mentioning the climate. And then 5 of these are for when you are directly talking about the climate. You know, we're saying, okay, so say you want to actually explain to people the carbon footprint. How are you going to do so in a way that's going to be less triggering? And again, Sophie's going to be sharing all of this stuff. So now this was the most fun slide for me to put together for this presentation, which was, okay, how could we potentially collaborate with all of you? So these were just the things that were honestly top of mind. These are the areas that we as an organization are eager to dig into. One, how can language alone shift purchase intent on college campuses? You know, I've heard a lot from you all about language, but seen more leaning into iconography. We as an organization really believe in the power of words, the power of framing. 2, how does language impact purchase intent, or I guess if the students aren't necessarily purchasing it, but picking up their food selection, how is it going to impact things differently among different demographics? And the work that we did last year, we saw that shifting the language can shift purchase intent, but it did so differently depending on the group. We also identified through a research sprint last year that people's connection to nature had a significant impact on their interest in sustainable foods. That is something that we are really eager to dig into more. Sophie and I have batted around some ideas on doing some kind of research on perhaps evaluating the food choices of people who are participating in some kind of nature immersion program on campus versus those who aren't. Fourth is, how do emotional hungers such as anxiety or loneliness impact people's interest in sustainable food choices? This again is a major part of what Food for Climate League is focused on. Last year in a research sprint, we were able to identify that people who said that they were lonely and lacking community, they were statistically more likely to choose an item that was described with community keywords and mood-centric keywords than they were of the controls and other variations. And then finally, we are super intrigued at what the role is of icons on sustainable food behaviors. So that's a lot of the work that you all are already doing. We're also eager to learn more about that. So that's all I have for you all today. Thank you so much for giving me the time. I'm happy to answer any questions and would love to work with so many of you.
Thank you, Eve, so much. That was really outstanding. And we are just about out of time. Unfortunately, we won't have time for Q&A. But what I think for some of you who've been with the collaborative for a long time, what I hope you see is what first drew me to Food for Climate League, which is that they're not reinventing the wheel. They took all the existing stuff out there, World Resources Institute, if any of you are familiar with their language playbook, our work, they took our work and built upon that. Many others who've been immersed in this and said, okay, from that foundation of what we know, what do we not know that we need to spend more time figuring out in order to really, I call it the last mile problem, right? There's great menu options that are plant forward, protein flip, biodiverse, regenerative, and so forth. How do we nail the messaging? And so it's just really synergistic. It harkens back to even, I remember one of our very first studies as a collaborative was Chris Basso, and his simple question was, do positive or negative messages about food waste make a bigger difference in behavior, right? I mean, these are existential perennial questions that we've been pursuing, and Food for Climate League is essentially accelerating those efforts. So we're excited. I'm going to turn over to Ghislaine to talk about kind of what's ahead in terms of driving climate action, and a big piece of that will certainly be research.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eve, and all for your eye-opening contributions and to help us set our minds on the next steps towards climate action and a better food system, ultimately. Carol mentioned it, there is no one-fits-all solution. A variety of tools is needed to address the challenges that we face. We've been inspired in the research working group by the work done at UCLA, and we are currently in the early phases of a potential language study in collaboration with the Food for Climate League, and all MCRC members interested, so don't hesitate to reach out. This project will build on our respective work, and I'm so interested in the work that the University of Reading has been doing. Thank you so much for your presentation. We want to address important questions about which types of menu language resonate most to motivate climate smart action, food selection, and possibly consumption. A culinary food-centered approach is needed to connect people with their diet. And maybe sustainability could also rhyme with authenticity rather than, health. On this subject, the more like climate smart food selection subject, please keep an eye out for a forthcoming compilation in a special news brief supplementing these live sessions that describes the ambitious and inspiring climate actions being taken across the MCRC sponsor companies. You won't want to miss that roundup for instilling new ideas on your own campuses and for better understanding our mission-aligned sponsors. Thank you so much all, and happy to take questions as well.
I think we're out of time, so thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon. We will be in touch with more details and very excited to share with you the climate initiatives of our mission-aligned sponsor organization. So as Ghislaine said, keep an eye out for that, and we will see you all next time. Take care, be well.